20 years, the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in Israel, sat in the home of a man named Abinadab. It wasn't in a golden temple. It wasn't housed in a majestic cathedral with stained glass and marble floors. It was in the back room of a common house on a hill. Among the children who grew up in that house was Uzzah. He ate, he slept, and he played just a few walls away from the manifest presence of the Almighty. But over 2 decades, the extraordinary became the ordinary. The Ark was no longer a terrifying mystery. It was just a piece of furniture. Uzzah didn't stop respecting God, but he stopped fearing him. He was trying to help God, but he died instantly. Long before Jerusalem became the center of world worship, before the songs of kings echoed through its gold-lined streets, and before massive crowds gathered to celebrate victories under a united kingdom, there was a house that carried a silence unlike any other in Israel. It stood on a hill in a place called Kirjath-Jearim. It was a simple house, constructed from the same materials as every other home in the village: weathered stone walls, heavy wooden beams, and a thick roof made of thatch. Nothing about its architecture suggested greatness. Nothing about its location drew the eyes of wealthy merchants or travelers passing by on the lower roads. From the outside, it was just the home of a man named Abinadab. And yet, inside that humble dwelling rested something no throne on earth could contain: the Ark of the Covenant. To truly understand the man named Uzzah, you have to understand the heavy, spiritual atmosphere of the house he grew up in. For 20 years, the most sacred object in human history sat in the back room of a commoner's home. It wasn't in a tabernacle. It wasn't tucked away behind a thick, multi-layered veil of purple and scarlet wool as it had been in the days of the wilderness. It was just there. The history of the Ark was one of fire and shadow. It had been captured by the Philistines, but it brought them nothing but plagues, tumors, and death. Their idols fell prostrate before it. Their cities were thrown into a panic. When they finally returned it to Israel, they sent it back on a cart pulled by cows, accompanied by offerings of gold. But when it returned, Israel was a broken, fragmented nation. They were a people who had lost their way. They didn't know how to steward the glory, so they brought it to Abinadab's home and left it there. Abinadab understood the weight of what had been entrusted to him. He was a man who knew that the divine cannot be handled casually. He consecrated his son Eleazar specifically to guard it. He set boundaries that were never to be crossed. He told his family, "Do not go in there. Do not look. Do not touch. This is the footstool of the Almighty." For 2 decades, every meal, every conversation, and every night of sleep was lived in the shadow of the Shekinah glory. Uzzah grew up in this environment, watching his father and brother approach that room with trembling hands and lowered heads. Uzzah was not a priest by official title. He was not a prophet who saw visions in the night. He was simply a son raised in the proximity of the Ark. From his earliest childhood into his full manhood, Uzzah lived with an awareness that few others in the history of the world ever experienced. He knew the Ark was there. It wasn't a legend told by elders around a campfire. It wasn't a distant memory of the Exodus from Egypt or the parting of the Red Sea. It was a physical, golden reality sitting in his own home. He would have known the laws of Moses passed down through the generations with strict precision. The Ark was never to be touched by human hands. It was to be carried on the shoulders of the Levites, using long poles made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. To touch the holy was to invite the fire of God. Uzzah knew this. He had heard the stories of the men of Beth Shemesh who looked inside the Ark and were struck down by the thousands. He knew the Ark was dangerous. But something happens to the human heart when sacred things remain close for too long without being properly honored. They become familiar. Familiarity is like a slow-growing vine. It doesn't sprout overnight. It begins with a shrug. It continues with a casual glance toward the doorway. It settles in when the extraordinary becomes the ordinary routine of daily life. Over 20 years, Uzzah saw the ark every single day. He saw it when he woke up and when he went to bed. Eventually, the weight of what it was began to fade into the background. The ark wasn't a terrifying mystery anymore. It was a piece of the household landscape. Slowly, without noticing the shift in his own soul, Uzzah began to feel comfortable in the presence of the living God. While the ark sat in silence on that hill, the nation of Israel was undergoing a massive transformation. A new king had risen to power, David. He was a man of action, a warrior, and a poet. But above all, David was a worshiper. He could not stand the idea of the ark being hidden away in a private house, removed from the heart of the people. He wanted the presence of God at the center of the nation. He wanted the ark in Jerusalem, the city of David, where the songs could rise and the presence of God would anchor the kingdom for generations to come. David made a decree: the ark would move. He didn't want a small, quiet relocation. He wanted a national festival. 30,000 chosen men of Israel were assembled. The finest musicians in the land tuned their harps, lyres, and lutes. They prepared their cymbals and tambourines. The atmosphere in Israel shifted from a quiet, fragmented hope to an electric, vibrating anticipation. And at the center of this movement was the quiet house of Abinadab. The day the ark was to leave, the silence of the hill died. The morning air was thick with the scent of dust, livestock, and the sweat of thousands of soldiers. The king himself arrived, dressed in the simple linen of a worshiper rather than the heavy armor of a monarch. Uzzah stood at the threshold of his home, watching the crowds. He was no longer the boy peeking through the cracks in the door. He was a man who felt a sense of ownership over the ark. In his mind, he was the expert. He knew how it sat, how it looked, and how it moved. But in their excitement, they made a catastrophic mistake. They didn't call for the poles. They didn't call for the Levites to sanctify themselves and prepare their shoulders for the burden. Instead, they took a shortcut. They looked at how the Philistines had moved the ark years before, and they decided to imitate them. They built a new cart. They thought they were being respectful. They used fresh wood, perhaps beautifully carved and gilded. They thought, why make men carry this on their backs when we can provide a chariot for the King of Kings? To David and the people, it seemed like a modern, efficient, and grand solution. It was a new cart for an ancient treasure. They loaded the ark onto the cart, and the procession began. At first, the journey was a masterpiece of human joy. The wheels of the new cart turned, groaning under the massive weight of the gold-covered chest. The oxen stepped forward with heavy rhythmic thuds. Behind them, the music erupted. The sound was a roar that shook the very air. David was at the front, dancing with a passion that bordered on madness. He spun, he leaped, and he shouted praises that were lost in the thunder of the instruments. Uzzah walked right in the middle of this hurricane of sound. He was the anchor of the logistics team. While the king was lost in the spirit and the people were lost in the melody, Uzzah stayed focused on the mechanics of the journey. He watched the wheels. He watched the oxen. He was the helper. He was the one making sure everything went smoothly. But the road to Jerusalem was not a paved highway. As they reached the threshing floor of Nacon, the terrain began to change. The smooth earth gave way to uneven, rocky soil. A threshing floor is a place of hard, physical labor, a place where the wheat is separated from the chaff. It is a place of judgment.
The oxen, weary from the noise and the weight, began to struggle. Their hooves slipped on the loose, jagged stones. The cart jolted violently. In a split second, an ox stumbled. The cart lurched to the left. The ark, the heavy gold-plated chest of the covenant, shifted. Because it was on a flat, modern cart and not secured on the shoulders of men, gravity took over. It began to tilt. It was going to fall. In that microsecond, a vision flashed through Uzzah's mind. He saw the ark hitting the dirt. He saw the gold plates denting against the rocks. He saw the sacred tablets of the law spilling into the dust. To Uzzah, this was a potential national embarrassment. He felt he had to protect the reputation of God. He had to save the ark. There was no time to think about the scriptures. There was no time to remember the warnings his father had given him 20 years ago. There was only instinct, the instinct of a man who had become too comfortable with the holy. Uzzah reached out, his fingers spread, his palm pressed firmly against the cold, hard gold of the ark to steady it. And in that moment, the world stopped. The music didn't fade out. It was severed as if by a knife. The harps went silent. The cymbals gave one last dying ring before hitting the dirt. The 30,000 voices were cut off instantly. Uzzah didn't cry out. He didn't have time to. His body didn't just fall. It was extinguished. There was a sudden, violent absence of life. Uzzah lay crumpled in the dust, his hand still inches away from the gold he had just touched. He was dead before his knees hit the ground. The oxen stood perfectly still. The cart remained tilted, yet the ark sat there, unblemished, unmoved, and terrifyingly holy. A cold mist of silence spread across the crowd. No one stepped forward. No one dared to touch the body. Everyone realized at once that they had been treating the Almighty as a commodity. David stopped dancing. The sweat on his skin turned cold. He looked at the body of his loyal guide, and he looked at the ark. He was terrified. He was angry. He realized that they had tried to bring the right thing home in the entirely wrong way. The tragedy of Uzzah is the tragedy of the new cart. It is the danger of thinking that our good intentions give us the right to ignore God's instructions. Uzzah thought he was protecting God from the dirt, but he forgot that the dirt obeys God, and he didn't. He thought the mud of the earth was more offensive to God than the touch of a man who had lost his sense of awe. David was so shaken that he stopped the procession. He left the ark in the house of a foreigner named Obed-Edom and went home in silence. It wasn't until 3 months later, when he saw that Obed-Edom was being blessed rather than killed, that he understood. The problem wasn't the ark. The problem was the cart. When David finally brought the ark into Jerusalem, there were no new carts. There were no shortcuts. He called the Levites. They sanctified themselves. They picked up the poles, and they carried the weight on their shoulders. They stopped every 6 steps to sacrifice and worship. They moved with a trembling joy, a joy that was anchored in deep, profound respect. The place where Uzzah fell was named Perez Uzzah, which means the outburst against Uzzah. It stands today as a warning to every one of us. We live in a world that tells us to make God accessible, comfortable, and familiar, but Uzzah's story reminds us that God is a consuming fire. The question it leaves for you today is this: are you moving the ark of your life on a new cart? Are you taking shortcuts in your faith because they seem more efficient? Have you let familiarity rob you of your fear of the Lord? Stop trying to steady what God has under control. Stop trying to help Him by breaking His word. Sincerity is no substitute for obedience. If this message challenged the way you approach the divine, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to return to a place of awe. Subscribe for more deep dives into the stories of the Bible. Don't just bring God into your life, bring Him in His way.